Evening, everybody. This is Dr. Hack. We're going to give you an exam today. We're going to see if you can do all the things that we've taught for the last 3 videos. And so I'm going to put in front of you a series of 3 positions that get more and more difficult as you go forward, until the third one, which should test even the smartest and strongest of players. Okay. And in the comments of this video, because after this video, we're going to have a small break in the end games. And maybe you want to go back and see another opening. We'll type that in the comments. Which opening do you want to see? Or if you want to see something else or another topic. Or if you want to just keep plowing on with the end games, say, Dr. Hack, keep going with the end games now, And I will take all of your comments into consideration. And then I will make the next series of videos starting next week. All right, here's the first position. This is Petrov playing Prince Urusov, 1853. And all I would like for you to do is come up with a plan on how to win this game. The exact moves, well, those can be worked out. But I want you to find the idea. Take your time. Pause the video. Okay. When I look at this one, I see potentially 2 options, but one of them is much, much simpler than the other, and so we'll take the simple one every time, but I'll tell you what both of them were. The first idea is to make this pawn into a queen. And in order to do that, our king will have to sit exactly on this square. Because if not, if his king is even close enough to touch the queening square, we'll never put the pawn on that square unless our king is also touching it. So we want our king to reach this square in order to win. And so if you came up with that idea and you're starting to work on moves on how to get your king to this square, I think you can give yourself the full points. Now, I'll give you an example of how it might go in a second. The other plan that may work is if you thought to look at these 2 pawns and say, hey, those 2 are locked together. That means that I can outflank this pawn. If I come at it from the side, I will always be able to get close enough to that pawn to capture it. But it's being guarded by something. So my first part of the plan is going to be to remove that, maybe by trading this off or some such thing. And after I've traded that, come back and outflank the pawn that's left, and then make a queen out of the g-pawn and win. If that was your plan, that one is more complicated, and yet it still works. There are pitfalls to avoid. There are some tricky draw opportunities for white if he's really on his game, but you can force it every time, so it's worth it. Okay, here's how the simpler plan might go. If we were to get our king and try to work our way up into this square. At some point, we're going to reach a position where we just need to move the pawn. It could be here, or it could be with his king in this position. But once we move the pawn, now we have to get his king to move so that we can come up here. Well, how do we do that? Well, how about if we waste a turn? Aha. And now it's white's turn, and if he's faced with very uncomfortable choices. If he moves away, we can take the square and make a queen, and the game's over. And if he doesn't, if he decides to leave his king where it is and try to sacrifice the pawns, that might be a nice opportunity to try for a draw for him. Because if we were to take this pawn, it would be a draw. We would have stalemated him by accident. Right? The pawn covers these, the king covers that, the other pawn covers that. Oops. But if black is really paying attention, then he'll just march this pawn in then to make a queen. And the king can't stop them both. We'll queen one, we'll queen the other, we'll queen the other, we'll queen the first. One way or the other, we're ending up with a queen. Okay. So that way definitely works. Well done if you spotted that. Give yourself a pat on the back, but don't break your arm. Okay, here's the next position. This is a game that was played in 1783 between Andrei Philidor playing black and Messiris. This is black to move. Let's come up with a plan that wins the game. Okay. This one is characterized by these 4 pawns that are not locked together. But it's our turn, and we could lock them together at any moment, and white could also lock them together at any moment. For example, if we push this pawn forward, whether they trade or whether they don't trade, it comes out to the same thing. This is now the pawn that we want, and we want to come at it from the side, right? If you were to take it, It would just change whose turn it was. And that same thing would be the case. We'd want to come at that pawn from the side. So that's what we need to make sure we can do when those pawns lock together. Because you'll notice that if you just did it now, and his king blocked us, it might make it quite tricky. If we go this way, we're never going to make it into these 3 squares. And if we go this way, we're going to start a pawn race. And we're going to see who can make a queen first. Now, if you were to calculate this all the way to the end, you'd find that black was just in time to win. But this is more calculation than we have to do in this case, because from here, if your plan was, let's get my king in position first so that when these lock together, I'll already be ready to walk in and get it, then that would be the easiest way to do this. So moving the king first is absolutely the most straightforward method. Okay? And now whatever white does next, we're either going to be in to try to get the pawns where they are, or if he locks them together, we're going to be able to walk across and win the pawn, and then win the game. So taking your king up to put it in position was actually much easier this time, even though both plans worked. Here comes the final position. Brace yourselves. This is a position from James Mason versus Rosenthal in 1883. James Mason was the first American chess author. And I have it on strong authority that he was a legend, but I don't know that for sure. This is white to move. Find the plan. Okay, I hope you spent some time on this one, because this one is full of stuff. Okay? The things that we can pick out of this that will help us create the right plan are the fact that these 2 pawns are locked together, and that means we have to come at that from the side in order to win the pawn. So we'd like to reach any of these 3 squares. The problem that we face is black has a passed pawn. And that means if we just start running over to try to take this, at any moment this pawn could start to move forward, and we'd have to abandon our plan and come back to stop it. Right? So what do? Well, we need to deal with this pawn first, and while we're dealing with this pawn, his king is going to be a great defender of that pawn. So we need to think of a way to make his king move away from the pawn at the right moment. Can you think of any way to make his king walk away? Yeah. If you were to push this pawn and start running towards becoming a queen, his king would have to escape and come back to stop it. And so that would leave this pawn open to be captured. And these 3 squares still exist. The problem that we now face is, if we were to capture this pawn, our stepping stone, with this one gone already, is 2 squares in front of our g-pawn. And so we're going to have to also decoy the king again if we want to make it to these 3 squares and win the game. How do we do that? Well, that's where this pawn comes into play. If we were to capture this pawn and then go over and capture this pawn, then his king will have to not stay over here and stop you from queening the g-pawn. His king will have to run back to the a file to stop your a pawn from making a queen. And that's what tips the game over and makes it a win. You have to decoy the king to the right, decoy the king to the left by capturing this one, and then you have to win with the g-pawn. So I'm going to start by trying to get my king into good position. And black's going to do his best to stop us. Notice that he can't leave the square of the pawn, or the pawn will beat him to the end of the board. So he couldn't bounce out and stand in front of us, because that would be too far away from the queening square. Okay, and let's say that he moves this pawn forward to stop us from making progress. And let's even move the pawn one more time. Okay, and now he has to do something, right? He has to do something, or we're going to get in and start threatening to win stuff. Oh, nothing he can do. Okay, and as this pawn starts going forward, that's what's going to force him to come across to try to stop it. And let's go ahead and make another pawn move here. We probably wouldn't want to put the pawn on the 6th row, because that would give our king very little maneuvering space on top of the pawn when he gets there. Okay, and you'll see why that's important right here. Notice how he's got us trapped against the wall? Doesn't let us off the wall. The only way to do it is to push the pawn and to still have a square to get out to. Okay, and now his king's going to go and stop the a-pawn, and while his king's stopping the a-pawn, we can get back to our 3 squares, outflank the g-pawn, and win the game. What a convoluted path to victory. Holy cow. Hope you guys got these. Hope they were easy. There were multiple ways to win. You could have found other ways. Remember to leave comments on what you want to see. We'll see you next time. Take care now. Bye.